The movie opens with a scene of a woman, Sophie, using a flashlight to peer through a hole, her excitement palpable. She's thrilled by her discovery and takes a photo of it in the cave. She turns to Dr. Bowl and asks, "I know Iraq is big, but is this a big discovery?" He confirms, "Yes, this is it," prompting her to call Albert. Meanwhile, Colin and his friend are observing Jennifer, who is engrossed in a book. They discuss how to approach her. Colin's father, Professor Albert, arrives, and Jennifer stops him for a chat, ending their conversation with a farewell hug. Colin and his friend watch this exchange, speculating about their relationship. Professor Albert then joins Colin and his friend, sending Joel, Colin's friend, to offer Jennifer a coffee. He advises Colin to strike up a conversation with Jennifer, describing her as a good girl. Colin's response is dismissive, which disappoints his father. As Professor Albert notices a book on Colin's table, a news broadcast catches his attention, and suddenly, an explosion occurs. Colin rushes to protect Jennifer, but amidst the chaos, Joel is injured and tragically dies on the spot. After some time, Colin wakes up at home. His father attempts to check on him and offer comfort, but Colin dismisses him. Suddenly, the doorbell rings. Catherine from Polydynamics is at the door. Colin jokingly tells her that his father is trying to set him up for marriage, despite Colin's claim that she's from a dating service. Professor Martin invites her in. Catherine begins to explain about her company, Polydynamics, and their recent findings related to the Zodiac. She also informs them about the unfortunate death of their expert, Dr. Bowles, and his co-worker due to a cave-in at the dig site caused by meteor showers. She invites Professor Martin to join her on a week-long expedition for $50,000. Initially, he declines, citing his lack of recent fieldwork experience, but eventually agrees after some persuasion from Colin. Upon arriving at the site, they feel the earth shift as they approach the cave. Professor Albert instructs Colin to wait in the car, making a light-hearted comment about sticking together. Inside the cave, they discover a Zodiac symbol chart carved into the wall. Albert admires the ancient artwork, explaining to Catherine that it's pre-Babylonian and Sumerian, and he doesn't fully understand it. Worried about his father, Colin enters the cave but ends up on the wrong path. Meanwhile, Professor Albert is trying to decipher the symbols. He explains to Catherine about the 8 planets, another circle, and the prophesied Nibiru or Planet X. As he touches each zodiac sign, he notices one is upside down. After adjusting it, the other zodiac signs begin to unlock. He realizes that the chart is also a machine. As he follows the sequence, he marvels at the ancient dome. Suddenly, the central part opens, and light pours out. Returning to Colin, he stumbles upon a hand buried in the stones and calls out for his father. Meanwhile, Catherine retrieves a rock-like object from her bag and places it in the open hole. Colin questions her about the object and its purpose there. Suddenly, they hear Colin's voice and rush to his aid, discovering that the buried person is Sophie. Catherine runs outside to call for help. Outside, she notices a large flock of birds flying erratically and receives a warning that a tsunami is expected to hit in 6 minutes. Albert drives as fast as he can to escape the impending flood, but they are forced to jump out of the vehicle as the floodwaters approach. Later at the station, Colin shows little interest in waiting around, while Albert is busy analyzing the situation. He tries to explain to Colin about the patterns he's noticed in the accident photos, including a sign resembling the Leo Zodiac symbol. Colin, however, remains skeptical. Suddenly, Dr. Tyler summons Albert to a meeting room. Albert explains his theory about the global accident patterns, suggesting that the next sign will be Aries. He also learns that the company has been researching power and the stone that Catherine placed in the hole from the beginning. They reject his explanation and inform him that their weekly plan is complete, suggesting he should return home. Albert notices on the screen that the 9th planet is drawing closer to the sun, indicating a potential end of the world scenario. He pleads with them to reconsider, but they dismiss him forcefully. Sophie questions Catherine, asking what if Albert is correct, but Catherine dismisses the idea and they proceed with their experiment. 2 researchers place the rock in the center of the experimental field. Back in the office, Catherine and the team begin their experiment using radial frequencies. Despite their efforts, they observe no results. Meanwhile, Colin remains upset with his father in the car, while Albert tries to explain the situation. Suddenly, an explosion erupts from the rock on the field, causing a massive disruption in frequencies. The computers malfunction, and everyone in the office is thrown off balance by the force. The driver parks the car and steps out to investigate, but is struck by a wave of radiation-like electricity. When they check on him, they find him unconscious. In a state of panic, Albert begins to drive away. Colin, now curious about the unfolding events, bombards Albert with questions. Albert plans to return to the field to retrieve the stone for further analysis, hoping to prevent future disasters. Meanwhile, Catherine attempts to get a report from the field, but receives no response. The driver regains consciousness and contacts the office. Albert quickly retrieves the stone and leaves. When the team arrives at the field, they find the stone missing. The leader calls in military support to locate Professor Albert and recover the stone. Catherine begins tracking the stone's location using GPS coordinates from the stone holder. Upon returning to the office, the leader discovers that Catherine and Sophie are missing. Meanwhile, Albert and Colin are intercepted by Catherine and Sophie. They question Albert about the stone just as a volcanic-like explosion occurs, taking the form of Aries. Everyone piles into the same car and attempts to escape, but the explosion intensifies and spreads to multiple locations around them. They finally reach a lake and exit the vehicle. After a while, the explosion subsides, and Catherine acknowledges that Albert was right. Back at the office, the leader learns that they've located the car but not the stone. They did, however, observe the Aries sign from the volcanic eruption. The officer berates the leader, expressing his frustration about the missing stone and dismissing the leader's story as a fairy tale. Meanwhile, Colin and Sophie are walking together, as are Albert and Catherine, engaging in conversations about their lives. Albert begins to explain what comes next. Libra. He elaborates that each sign is associated with an element, which explains why Scorpio represents water, hence the tsunami. Aries and Leo represent fire, hence the explosions. They start to speculate about the next sign and its potential implications. Sophie shares that she saw something in Iraq that might shield the stone. Albert finds some missing information on Sophie's tablet, but it doesn't contain all the data they need. They decide to return to gather more information. While on the road, they spot an approaching car and wave for help, unaware that it's driven by officers. They plead with the officers to work together to solve the situation, but Tyler rejects their offer and forcefully takes the stone from them. Albert requests Tyler to join them, but they leave him behind. Albert then calls the officer to inform him about the stone, repeatedly asking for confirmation. When Tyler attempts to verify the stone's presence in the canister, a radiation explosion occurs. Unable to reach the officer, Albert and the team rush towards the explosion site, where they find the car destroyed and the stone lying alone. They search for the canister, which Colin eventually finds. Albert places the stone back into the canister and explains the connection between the stone and the planet Nibiru, indicating that as the planet gets closer to the sun, the disasters intensify. Meanwhile, the officer is searching for them by helicopter. As they continue walking, Colin asks Sophie what caused the stone to react, but she informs him that their experiment was halted due to the disaster. Suddenly, another disaster in the form of a wind tornado begins. Everyone, including Albert's team and the officer in the helicopter, attempts to escape the wind tornado. Albert and his team struggle, but are fortunate to find help from a man named Marty, who guides them to safety in an underground room. The room is fully equipped, prompting them to ask Marty why he built such a place. Marty explains his belief in the impending Third World War and the rise of the Antichrist, mentioning the year 2012. Colin interrupts him, pointing out that it's currently 2014, and questions how Marty knows about planet Nibiru. Albert inquires how long Marty has been living there. Upon seeing a flowchart and a computer in the room, Catherine asks Marty if the computer works. He assures her it does, as it operates on solar power and satellite internet, prompting her to start searching. Albert notices something missing from Marty's flowchart and asks if all the accidents listed are recent. Marty confirms they are and mentions that he's tried to share this information before, but was dismissed. Meanwhile, the officer observes the catastrophic aftermath of the disaster, witnessing the planet being torn apart piece by piece. He returns to the helicopter to retrieve the coffin. Back at Marty's shelter, they begin to discuss and make sense of the events that have transpired. They realize that there are 7 signs left, with Sagittarius and Cancer being the next ones. Colin inquires about the meaning of these signs, to which Marty responds with the apocalypse. Meanwhile, Catherine locates the tablet phone, which is 90 miles away from their current location. At this point, Marty offers them the use of his car. Taken aback, they gratefully accept his offer. Albert expresses his gratitude, saying, "You are a godsend for us." Marty thanks them for their belief in him and sends them off with a parting message: save the world. As they drive, Albert tries to avoid water bodies, given that Cancer is associated with water. However, in the midst of their journey, disaster strikes. Albert attempts to drive as fast as possible, but their car crashes and they find themselves trapped. Meanwhile, the intensity of the disaster escalates. All of them exited the car and attempted to push it, but the disaster was too severe. Catherine re-entered the car to retrieve the stone and handed it to Albert. As the disaster was about to engulf her, Albert grabbed her hand and tried his utmost to save her, but unfortunately, he couldn't. After a while, everything calmed down, and the planet Nibiru was drawing closer to the sun. The officer received a call informing him that Catherine had accessed his account and viewed the data from Iraq. Back with Albert, Sophie was questioning why the disaster also had an air element, and how they couldn't predict the next one. Colin joined in, but Albert interrupted them. Colin blamed Albert for Catherine's death, but Albert reassured him that he was just as concerned and was trying to help. Amid their argument, Sophie noticed a building they were looking for, so they headed towards it. The building turned out to be the laboratory of Harry Settage, whom Colin admired. With Sophie's help, they entered the deserted laboratory. Hearing a voice from upstairs, they found Dr. Harry drinking. Initially, he mistook them for the officer's associates and threw a bottle at them. However, he later trusted them and shared his efforts, handed them the tablet, and explained the machine he had built. During their discussion, Dr. Harry realizes that Colin has read his book. He informs them that the machine is useless without the stone. Upon seeing the stone, he brightens up and reassures them that there are no true dead ends. Suddenly, the officer and his team arrive and shoot at Dr. Harry. They attempt to escape, helping Dr. Harry in the process. However, it becomes increasingly difficult to both assist him and evade capture. Before they leave, Dr. Harry provides them with crucial information and a key. The officer apprehends Dr. Harry and aggressively interrogates him about their whereabouts. Dr. Harry responds in a drunken manner, leading to a heated exchange. Meanwhile, Albert, Colin, and the rest drive as fast as they can. Albert's hand is injured from a gunshot. The officers are in hot pursuit, but Colin manages to drive the car through a hill using a technique Dr. Harry taught him. The officer eventually locates them and forcefully takes the stone. Meanwhile, a plane begins to collide with the sun. Albert instructs them to activate the machine and tail the officer to retrieve the stone. Sophie and Colin begin operating the machine, causing the surroundings to transform. The officer confronts Albert, but as he tries to flee, Albert counters him. Meanwhile, the Earth is on the brink of being assaulted by explosions from both sides. Sophie and Colin successfully get the Armageddon machine up and running. All that's left is to insert the stone. In a stroke of luck, Albert manages to retrieve the stone from the officer. They place the stone in the machine, setting the system in motion. They quickly drive away, while the officer stays close, observing the machine's operation. He is eventually engulfed by the explosion's protective shield. By the movie's end, they have saved the world, and Sophie and Colin share a kiss. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.